All right, folks, we are bringing back the bandana for this one, and you all know why. It's because we are esoteric, introspective white boys who all read David Foster Wallace when all those think pieces hit earlier this year. Oh, what's that you say? This is a headscarf, not a bandana? Marley, you look like a pirate. Fucking matey, they will not find the plank I'll make you walk off of. My name is Marley, and today, in a move that would sicken my 13-year-old self, we are going to be talking about poetry. Not just any poetry, free verse poetry. You may ask yourself, Marley, what are your qualifications to talk about a form of art that is so complex and rich and nuanced and layered and as free-flowing as free verse poetry? I'm glad you asked. I have no qualifications. With that out of the way, we can keep going. I only really started to read poetry a few years ago. Up until that point, I'd read the Poe, I'd read the Frost, and in middle school, believe it or not, one of my teachers tried to get us interested in poetry by doing a lyrical analysis of Eminem's Lose Yourself. This was like 15 years ago. Imagine how bad it's gotten now. They're probably doing fucking
insert artist here
analyses, or however you pronounce that dude's name. And beyond, those obligatory school readings, whenever I read poetry, there was some amount of derision involved, usually. Like, I'd read Rupi Kaur at the bookstore to make fun of her, good old classic clean Barnes & Noble fun. Part of this derision, this looking down on poetry, I think, involved this misguided sense of thinking on my part that I had to get to the heart of every poem that I read, because poems are these things, and they must be understood on some deeper level, or you aren't really enjoying them or reading them at all. And what is really messed up about that is that I kind of just started enjoying poetry by enjoying the poetry. Like, I would just check out collections, read them, and I wouldn't think consciously about much else besides, how does this language make me feel? I'm working towards deeper textual analysis of poetry by continuing to read it, but that's a way off. Right now, I'm just reveling in the words, baby. So now I have all these collections strewn all across my bookshelf by all sorts of different types of poets, Whitman, Maya Angelou. Today, you and I are going to be talking about one of those poets. And this poet, he's a guy who lived a life that is frankly almost unbelievable. He lived the kind of life that, like, as you're reading his poetry and as you're reading about him, you kind of almost feel ashamed about your own life and how it just pales in comparison. This is a life that is full of heartbreak, it's full of joy, it's full of good decisions, full of bad decisions. It's the kind of life that begs to be talked about more, especially here in the US, where I really did not know that much about this guy prior to, like 3 months ago. So with all this in mind, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone watching, we are going to return to Chile, to that thin strip of land at the end of the world, and we are going to talk about Pablo Neruda. There is so much dark light in space, and so many dimensions suddenly yellow because the wind does not fall and the leaves do not breathe. I have no idea how to talk about Pablo Neruda. I have been talking about Pablo Neruda to people in my life basically since I started reading him, and it's been 3 or 4 months now. There are people who are concerned, and I still have no idea what I'm doing. So we're going to start talking, and we're going to hope that we can figure out what we're doing along the way. This sort of seed was planted when I read Dream Horse. It is admittedly a minor poem by Pablo Neruda, but like the moment I read it, I was like, we're gonna have to talk about this guy. Pablo Neruda was a poet first and foremost. After that, he was a statesman, gourmand, diplomat, politician, cheater in some order there. And let's get this right here, because I'm gonna get this wrong if I don't look at this. He was born Ricardo Elisier Neftali Reyes Balso Alto in Chile. He was born in Parral, Chile in 1904. He was the son of a railroad worker and a school teacher, and his mother died 2 months after he was born. I guess we should start with the initial aim of this video. Its genesis was in my reading of Residence on Earth, a collection of poetry written by Pablo Neruda across decades and continents of his life. In my admittedly very limited experience reading poetry, it is not often that I'm full-on pushed over, knocked over by a poem. You know what? Actually, let's strike that. It is not often that I am knocked over by any literature anymore. And by knocked over, I don't mean liked or loved or even had a favorite novel, right? By knocked over, I mean had your life genuinely changed by something. I can count on one hand the number of books that have really deeply personally impacted me. If I'm being honest with myself about the books and the works that have impacted me, I feel like I do have to add Pablo Neruda's Residence on Earth to that list. I happen to be tired of being a man. I happen to enter tailor shops and movie houses withered, impenetrable, like a felt swan navigating in a water of sources and ashes. I happen to be tired of my feet and my nails and my hair and my shadow. I happen to be tired of being a man. To say that I felt like seen or understood by the residents would be to live in a place that is called Understatement City, right? When I was reading this, I had this lightning bolt, this out of body experience. Like finally, here I found someone who gets it, who understands this world in a way that I can relate to, in a way that I struggle to find out on my own. Preemptively, folks, I should apologize. We're going to be doing a lot of glazing in this video. I know it's tough to watch. You don't want to watch me glaze nonstop, but it is what it is. We're going to be glazing. It's going to get messy. So, The Residence on Earth. It is a collection that is dominated by melancholy, and Pablo Neruda wrote it when he had already achieved a pretty high level of fame for writing 20 love poems and a song of despair. 20 love poems and a song of despair did for Latin American young men in 1920 what Hey There Delilah did for white boys and guitars in 2007. Chances are, if you know anything about Pablo Neruda or anything by Pablo Neruda, it's probably from 20 love poems. We are not talking about that collection, though. We are talking about the Residencia. The Residencia is actually a collection of 3 separate volumes, initially published in 1933. That was when the first came out, then 35, and the final volume would have to wait until 1947 to be published. Nowadays, they are sold bound as one volume. The expansive time across which these poems were written means that they cover a lot of different ground in terms of their subject matter. Some are more personal, more introspective, more melancholy, while others are political and they have a fiery rage to them. I fall into the shadow amid destroyed things, and I look at spiders, and I graze on thickets of secret, inconclusive woods, and I walk among moist fibers torn from the living being of substance and silence. The thing that really sunk its hooks into me, sunk its claws into me deep when I read this collection was the love for the world that is so clear and so effervescent across the collection, even in the most depressing of these poems. In my poems, I have wished to speak of simpler, more common, more elemental things. I have made poems about wood, air, stone, the clock, the sea, tomatoes, plums, the onion. They are poems of overwhelming joy. Neruda speaks of a joy that he finds in this world, and it's a joy that he does find in these most small, minuscule, seemingly insignificant things. But it's a joy that's also found in human connection, because, after all, are we not a part of this world too? I mean, in spite of that, though, The Residence on Earth, it is a sad collection. It's introspective, it's melancholy, it can feel depressing and isolating. Pablo Neruda, in his later years, he would go on to disavow the work in certain instances because he felt simply that it was too dark. I don't blame you if you find the darkness in this collection overwhelming or overpowering, but to me, even, well, not in every poem, but in most poems, there's something there, there's a little ray of sunshine, there's a little something for you to latch onto, that even in the face of this overwhelming totality of melancholy, you're like, yeah, I'm glad I could be alive so I could read this. How pure you are, by sunlight or by fallen night. How triumphal and boundless your orbit of white, and your bosom of bread high in climate, your crown of black trees. This is a big collection. Take a look at it, admire its width, its girth, its strength. It's nicely bound, it's tight, it's thick, it's really everything that I'm looking for. Not for the faint of heart, that's for absolute certain. As such, it would kind of be unwise for me to try and dissect every poem in here. For one, the video would be 9 hours long. For two, watching me do poetic analysis is about as much fun as watching your dog get shot. What we do have time for is a quick little glance at a poem. Now, I think the best poem for us to use for this purpose is going to be one of the best known poems in the collection. It's titled The Widower's Tango, and it's from Residence 1, which was published in 1933. I should make something clear, if it wasn't clear already. All of these poems were initially published in Spanish. That's one of the fun things about this collection here, is that it's got the Spanish on one side and it's got the English on the other, which is a fun, cool thing. So Spanish was the language in which these poems were initially written, and that is the language in which they have the most power. This puts me in a little bit of a quandary. Why is that, you may ask? Lo siento, mi español no es bueno y no puedo que recitar estas poéticas. We're going to have to do English for this video. The Widower's Tango starts like this. Oh, evil one, you must by now have found the letter. You must have wept with fury, and you must have insulted my mother's memory, calling her rotten bitch and mother of dogs. You must have drunk alone, all by yourself, your twilight tea, looking at my old shoes forever empty. And you won't be able any longer to recall my illnesses, my night dreams, my meals, without cursing me as if I were still there, complaining about the tropics, about the Corinthis coolies, about the poisonous fevers that did me so much harm, about the frightful Englishmen that I still hate. So, based off that limited selection, what does the poem actually do? Off the bat, we can see that it is addressed to someone, likely an ex-lover. Neruda has left this person, telling them only with a letter, and very quickly he uses a series of very small brushstrokes to paint a very detailed picture. These images are intensely human. He imagines how the poem's recipient might view him upon discovering his departure, using a left-behind pair of shoes as a foundation to build further images off of. Various corners of Neruda's domestic life with this person are addressed, things that only someone who has lived with Neruda for a long time can really attest to. These images, although unique to Neruda for the recipient of the poem, are also universal. When a relationship ends, the little things that are lost can be the most painful. For the recipient, it might be Neruda's complaints about the tropics, a climate which Neruda never really acclimated to. But to the reader, Neruda's complaints may bring to mind a common complaint of an old lover's. Maybe the reader's ex always complained about the rain or the searing summer heat. Or maybe the reader connects with the last line. Maybe the reader is dangerously based in the same way that Neruda was and understands the inherent evil of the British people. The opening to the poem, the stark imagined reality of Neruda's departure, and the imagination of the recipient contemplating their solitude against a twilight sky with only their tea for company, it's so brutal, it's so melancholy, but it's so human at the same time. It's deeply entrenched in the human experience. Love for humanity and that human experience is perhaps the single greatest driving force behind Neruda's poems. It is a constant theme running through all of his work, and I want you to remember that. Pablo Neruda deeply loved people. So now that we've examined a section of one of Pablo Neruda's poems without any background context, what is there left to do? Well, we could keep doing this for like 20, 30 odd minutes, but that would get monotonous, man. That would get wrote really fucking quickly, and between you and me, I know why you're here. You're not here to listen to like fucking poetic analysis. You are here to listen to me rant about the maddening personal lives of the people who make our art. And well, if that's what you're here for, far be it from me to keep you from what you need. What a day has arrived! What a thick light of milk, compact, digital, indulges me. I'm sorry, guys. It genuinely was not supposed to go like this. It is so fucking hot. It is so fucking hot where I am, you have no idea. Okay, I read The Residence on Earth, and it rocked my world. I said to myself, immediately after finishing it, I must know more about this man. I must read more by this man. I must read more about this man. But reading poetry tends to take me a long time. I tended to only do like a poem or three a night, and with longer poetry collections, which Pablo Neruda has published many of, that'll take me a long time to get to. So, what's left for me to do? Oh, fuck yeah, dude. See, that's right, folks. This is actually a 2-book video. Just when you thought the scope couldn't creep any further, the scope crept. Pablo Neruda's memoirs are fucking insane. They are baller as all hell, and they contain stories that beggar belief. Some of them probably are bullshit, if I'm being honest with you. There is a point in his memoirs where he tells a story about how he almost prevented Pearl Harbor from happening, right? And that is almost certainly true invention. Like, that story did not happen. But by the point you get to that point in the memoir, you have read so many insane stories that you kind of just want to accept it on face value. In these memoirs or recollections, there are gaps here and there, and sometimes they are also forgetful, because life is like that. This combination of things, the Latin American author who writes beautifully and then lies about it afterwards, it was too much for me, you understand? It was too many things. It broke my brain. I had to include the memoirs in this video because they are just so, they're fucking bonkers, right? And they did a lot for me. They did almost as much for me as the Residencia did. Incidentally, one thing that the memoirs did is they made my to-be-read list longer because it gives you such a unique insight into the Latin American and Spanish artistic and literary movements of the time. I TBR'd at least 10 books because of this memoir, okay? That's how crazy these memoirs are. Pablo Neruda, he lived a life that makes you feel like you have not lived life at all. The poem we talked about a little bit ago, The Widower's Tango, that was inspired by a real person, a real woman who Pablo Neruda only identified as Josie Bliss. And in real life, they had the kind of romantic, dangerous, and potentially deadly love affair that got my theater history professor fired. Sweet Josie Bliss gradually became so brooding and possessive that her jealous tantrums turned into an illness. Sometimes a light would wake me up, a ghost moving on the other side of the mosquito net. It was she, dressed in white, brandishing her long, sharpened native knife. This woman so terrified Neruda that he left the country. He fled from Burma, now Myanmar, to Sri Lanka to escape her. He spent some time there before she turned up again. She followed Neruda across borders, carrying her belongings with her, and sat outside his front door, insulting visitors there because Neruda, somewhat understandably, would not let her inside. She only left the country due to the efforts of one of Neruda's neighbors, a Mr. Fernando. Mr. Fernando was a miracle worker. He allowed Bliss to stay in his house, where he was able to somehow convince her to leave the country and Neruda, something our dear Pablo was never capable of doing. So, just to recap, Pablo Neruda had a love affair with a Burmese woman while he was serving as a diplomat there, and she was so insane that he felt his life was at risk. He fled the country to get away from her mid-flight, writing a poem that would become iconic about it. Then, once he was in this new country, she follows him there. She follows him there and sleeps on his doorstep until one of his neighbors, a man who was named Mr. Fernando, convinces her to leave. This is one of the least insane stories about Pablo Neruda's life. The sources for this information are pretty much only Neruda himself, though, so, salt and grain and all that. One of the things that made writing this video so difficult for me was, as I read the memoir, there were so many stories in there that would make insane videos all on their own. I would love nothing more than for this video to just be me recounting stories from Pablo Neruda's memoirs, but frankly, I think you'd do yourself a better service by reading them, and then the video would be an hour long, right? I mean, here are some of the stories he recounts that I simply just do not have time for. So now you might ask, what is the point of this video? And it's sort of become an all-encompassing video, right? Kind of like how Pablo Neruda's poetry is all-encompassing. As I came to learn by reading his memoirs, Pablo Neruda had exactly 3 concerns that occupied most of his life. His humanism informs these concerns, and these concerns occupy a huge place in his poetry as well. These concerns are, in some order, the beauty of the world around us, Pablo Neruda's sex addiction, and his sheer devotion to building communism. Mr. Neruda's communism is both enlightening and at times infuriating. In his roles as politician and diplomat, he made what are likely his most important contributions to the world outside of his poetry, and these are decisions and contributions that were shaped by his humanism. His humanism was informed by a staunch opposition to tyranny and fascism of all stripes. That's what I'd like to say, but in reality, there was one stripe that Pablo Neruda was kind of okay with. You see, basically from the second that Pablo Neruda started to get woke, he was a staunch Stalinist. In fact, the Residencia itself contains no less than 4 separate odes to communism and Stalinism. 2 of them are specifically songs about the city of Stalingrad. So, take that for what you will. Neruda's Stalinism lessened towards the end of his life as he became more aware of Stalin's crimes, but walking that road to admitting what Stalin was, that was a long path for Neruda, and he never quite walked it all the way. I don't know a lot about Russian history. It's not something I learned a lot about when I was reading a lot of history, and I would like to learn more eventually, but that's probably going to have to wait for a later time. So I'm kind of uneducated on the subject. I should also say that I don't really give a shit if someone is a communist. Yes, there have and will continue to be bad communist governments in the history of this world. But I would like to know if you have seen what capitalist governments have done to this planet that we live on over the last century or so. That being said, even in my uneducated view, it is my understanding that if you had to pick a worst communism to be a follower of, you would be hard-pressed to find a better communism that fits the bill than Stalinism. Neruda's Stalinism was a mistake, yes, but what led him that way, it was pretty understandable. He ran in a lot of circles, a lot of artistic circles that tended to be more leftist. And his second wife, Delia del Carril, she was even more leftist than he was, which is an achievement, considering. But not only were his social circles more left-leaning, Neruda visited all the corners of the globe. He visited many, many countries. Some of those countries were led by dictators, and fascist dictators were kind of in at around that time. Neruda saw the best way to resist fascism as communism. He saw many of his friends, people in these countries, and ordinary people too, being killed or thrown into gulags by the oppressive dictators which ran these countries. Let's take, for example, Pablo Neruda's friendship with Federico García Lorca, who was a Spanish poet. He basically defined Spanish poetry for a generation. Pablo Neruda loved this man, all right? They had an extremely close relationship while Lorca was alive. And it is in some of Neruda's writing about Lorca and about their friendship that his humanism is on the most brilliant display. What a poet! I have never seen grace and genius, a winged heart and a crystalline waterfall come together in anyone else as they did in him. His was a magnetic joyfulness that generated a zest for life in his heart and radiated it like a planet. That's a beautiful sentiment and it's beautiful writing. Also a little bit gay, which can happen with the homies sometimes. I am not one to judge. But if you thought that was gay, wait until you read the poem. I could die for how sweet you are. I could die for the red lakes where in the midst of autumn you live with a fallen steed and a bloodied god. Lorca and Neruda had a beautiful relationship, one that was unfortunately cut short when Lorca was murdered by the Franco regime in 1936. Lorca's loss is generally referred to as being a canon event in Neruda's radicalization towards communism and Stalinism. Neruda felt this incredible devastation at Lorca's death, one that would persist until the end of his life, and that devastation was echoed when he saw other people being hurt, destroyed, or tyrannized by governments like Franco's. This makes his inability to see Stalin for the monster that he was all the more paradoxical. After all, Neruda is the same man who, with tireless work and tireless effort, was able to organize a boat for refugees to flee one of these countries. It is generally referred to this event as being the defining event of Neruda's political career. He would go on to say as such in his memoirs. What he did was people who were fleeing Franco's Spain, they fled into France, and Neruda organized a boat that took them from France to Chile so that they could emigrate peacefully and safely and make new lives. Neruda was not the only one who made this happen, but he was the driving force behind the event. This monolithic act of human compassion, assisting the refugees in the way that he did, it's indicative of the type of work and advocacy that Neruda tried to perform in his entire career as a politician and a diplomat. Pablo Neruda would provide a voice for the downtrodden in his country, especially laborers like those who worked in Chile's copper mines. He never stopped advocating for their rights and never stopped advocating for them more on a global scale as well, especially in the face of imperialism like that of the United States. There are many of these stories in his memoirs, including a particularly illuminating, if probably hypothetical situation, wherein Neruda describes the motivation behind his continuing to fight, to work, to raise his voice, and to write poetry. My reward is the momentous occasion when, from the depths of the Lode coal mine, a man came rising up out of the tunnel into the full sunlight on the fiery nitrate field, as if rising out of hell, and stretching out his rough hand to me, he said, "I have known you for a long time, my brother." Not only did Pablo Neruda do good things, like indisputably, even outside of his memoirs, it's been logged that he did these things, he did them on such a scale that it kind of breaks my brain to even think about it. Like, I'm sitting here talking about it and I'm like, what am I even doing with my life? That's how deeply impacted I am by this man and his story. This video is already kind of long, and although I would like to talk about so many more stories from these memoirs regarding Neruda, I couldn't do that without torpedoing the already precarious structure of the video. So with that in mind, I think we're going to... I shall place her like a sword or a mirror, and I shall open until death her fearful legs, and I shall bite her ears and her veins, and I shall make her retreat, her eyes closed, in a thick river of green semen.
Francis, you really should see somebody.
Pablo Neruda's poetry is something that is riddled with the sensual. You don't so much read his poetry as you feel it. Is that a pretentious thing to say? Absolutely. I am blessed enough to not care at all. If you are lonely and you read this collection of work, you are probably most heavily going to identify with the feelings of alienation and isolation in the work, which are often brought on by romantic and sexual isolation. This is certainly the case for Mr. Neruda. Women feature hugely in his poetry and in his memoirs, and I mean, it's kind of a little whack, honestly. Like, for the first 100 pages of the memoir, you low-key feel like you're reading the diary of a sex addict. So it might make you feel a little uncomfortable when I follow that statement up by saying that his relationship with women hugely shaped his worldview and his poetry. Gabriela Mistral, one of the founding mothers of Chilean poetry, was Neruda's teacher, and his second wife, Delia del Carril, often served as first editor and reader of Neruda's work. If Delia made suggestions, he would use them. This practice only stopped when Pablo stopped showing her his poetry. Why, you ask, did he stop showing her his poetry? Well, that is because he was writing, let me check this here, graphic love sonnets to the woman who he was cheating on Delia with. Her name was Mathilde, and she would eventually become his third and final life. That work, those graphic love sonnets, would become the work The Captain's Verses, which you can read today. Fun fact. Oh, and also don't worry, he cheated on Mathilde too. Yeah, Pablo Neruda, he cheated or tried to cheat on every woman that he was ever in a relationship with. There's a fun little story about this, actually. Delia, his second wife, as you might have guessed, she was initially the other woman. So when Pablo started cheating on her, eventually she found out, because of course she's going to find out, he tried to win her back by basically saying, "We did the same thing. What are you mad at me for?" This fucking guy. This totally breaks the flow of the video, and I really should cut it, but I have to make time to mention this. I'm sorry. Delia was such an interesting woman. She was 20 years older than Neruda, and the relationship may have had a sort of a mothering aspect to it, which, you know, go off. So that's weird enough on its own, right? But weirder still is the pet term that Delia used to refer to Pablo. This is real, this is sourced in the autobiography. Which, I mean, the biography brings up this nickname twice. It makes a big deal about this. The aside's over, we're back to the regular video now. Neruda wrote all this shit to, about, and for women, and yet he just had this heartbreaking incapability of treating the women closest to him well. I am not saying this because I wish to ascribe some kind of morality to a man that was born in 1904. I don't really want to judge him by the standards of today. That feels like a pointless exercise. But even so, even if we're judging him by the standards of his time, he was kind of a cad. His friends openly were upset about the shit that he was doing to Delia. And even apart from that, I think we were also pretty certain, I'd have to double check this, in 1929 that sexual assault was a bad thing. There is a passage in Pablo Neruda's memoirs where he details an interaction he had with a woman in Burma while he was staying there. This passage is more than anything else responsible for a furor over Neruda's legacy in Chile today. To dismiss it out of hand because Neruda's memoirs are full of half-truths, exaggerations, and lies would be lazy and dismissive of the real harm that this passage contains and can do. It is a vile description of a vile act, and it boggles my mind that Neruda would do something like this, given who he was as a person. It also boggles my mind that he saw it fit to include in his memoirs. I will not unpack this any further here, mostly because I don't feel qualified. But I would like to say that Pablo Neruda did a lot of good and a lot of bad in his life, in the way that most human beings do, except amplified on a much larger scale. Pablo Neruda's love for humanity informed the good and the bad that he did, and it informed his writing which has really deeply impacted me in ways that I'm still struggling to articulate. Pablo Neruda loved humanity. Because of this, it is perhaps his greatest failure that he did not see women as belonging to humanity in the same way that men did. I want to live in a world where no one is excommunicated. I will not excommunicate anybody. I want to live in a world where beings are only human. I have never understood the struggle except as something to end all struggle. Pablo Neruda died on September 23rd, 1973. He died not 2 weeks after Pinochet completed his military takeover of the country, an event which was bankrolled by the US. They bankrolled opposition to Allende, Neruda's friend, who was the socialist, democratically elected president of Chile. And Neruda had to watch from his deathbed as many of the friends that he'd made in the country that he loved and all of the work that he'd spent his life building was tortured, murdered, and thrown into prisons. Neruda, in a way, was a victim of Pinochet as well. His home in Santiago was ransacked by Pinochet's army before he died. His belongings were rifled through and destroyed. Furniture was overturned. The house was just made a complete mess of. And then when Neruda died, in one final act of defiance, in one last spit in the eye of dictatorships across the world, especially those in the country that he loved so dearly, Neruda's wake, his memorial, was held in this house. So The people who came to pay their respects, they had to see not only Pablo Neruda dead, but the wreckage that was being wrought upon their very country as well. Pablo Neruda was a rare thing. I mean, he feels like the most human of writers. In him was captured the best and the worst of humanity. He, by and large, left the world a better place with his diplomatic actions and with his poetry, but in his personal life was a deadbeat and a cheater, if we are being generous, right? There was much worse things that he himself has recounted doing in his memoirs. In Pablo Neruda's person, in his flaws and in his fuck-ups, there's represented just the full range of humanity. We are so capable of doing so many beautiful things for one another and for our children, but more often than not, we can't help but give into our baser instincts. I've talked to you a lot about a very confusing man today. I've talked about the good, the bad, the personal, the political, the memoirs, the poetry, the life, and the death. And still, I can't make my mind up about this guy. I just can't. So I can't in good conscience recommend you to read him or not. What I would like to do then, in lieu of a sort of ending, is I would like to read you a poem. It's my favorite poem from The Residence on Earth. And I realize this might be a bit much for some of you, and you're welcome to go if you'd like. Thank you for staying. But if you do stick around, I would just like to ask that maybe if you're intimidated by poetry, or if you don't understand it because of all the devices and all that fucking like references bullshit, I invite you to just listen to the words and consider how they make you feel. My name is Marley. Thank you for spending your time with me here today. This poem is titled, I Explain a Few Things. It is from the Spain in Our Hearts series, which is published in Pablo Neruda's Residence on Earth. You will ask, and where are the lilacs and the metaphysical blanket of poppies, and the rain that often struck your words, filling them with holes and birds? I am going to tell you all that is happening to me. I lived in a quarter of Madrid, with bells, with clocks, with trees. From there one could see the lean face of Spain like an ocean of leather. My house was called the House of Flowers because it was bursting everywhere with geraniums. It was a fine house with dogs and children. Raúl, do you remember? Do you remember, Raphael, Federico? Do you remember Under the Ground? Do you remember my house with balconies where June light smothered flowers in your mouth? Brother, everything was great shouting, salty goods, heaps of throbbing bread, markets of my Argel quarter with its statue like a pale inkwell among the haddock. The olive oil reached the ladles, a deep throbbing of feet and hands filled the streets. Meters, liters, sharp essence of life, fish piled up, pattern of roofs with cold sun on which the vein grows weary, frenzied fine ivory of the potatoes, tomatoes stretching to the sea. And one morning all was aflame. And one morning the fires came out of the earth, devouring people. And from then on fire, gunpowder from then on, and from then on blood. Bandits with airplanes and with Moors, bandits with rings and duchesses, bandits with black-robed friars blessing, came through the air to kill children. And through the streets the blood of the children ran simply, like children's blood. Jackals that the jackal would spurn, stones that the dry thistle would bite spitting, vipers that the vipers would abhor. Facing you, I have seen the blood of Spain rise up to drown you in a single wave of pride and knives. Treacherous generals, look at my dead house. Look at broken Spain. But from each dead house comes burning metal instead of flowers. But from each hollow of Spain, Spain comes forth. But from each dead child comes a gun with eyes. But from each crime are born bullets that will one day seek out in you where the heart lies. You will ask, why does your poetry not speak to us of sleep, of the leaves, of the great volcanoes of your native land? Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets.